Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are tackling, well, a real unsung hero of the signal chain, the graphic equalizer. Yeah, we're not diving into the roaring distortion boxes or the shimmery chorus effects this time.
Yeah.
We're focused on that quiet but totally indispensable tool for tone sculpting. It's amazing how just a few sliders can completely redefine an instrument sound.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
It can take something muddy and just give it air, or turn a kind of thin lead into this roaring, perfectly placed force.
Exactly.
The graphic equalizer, or GE as we'll probably call it, it's really where you get the difference between like good tone and perfectly mixed tone. Is the sonic chisel, you could say.
Sonic chisel, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our mission today is a bit of a deep historical dive. We're tracing the lineage of the iconic BAS GE series.
Right.
We're going model by model, starting way back with these massive studio-grade units from the mid-'70s and moving right down to the compact pedal board staples that, pretty much every guitarist and bassist relies on today.
So we're going to pull out the key milestones, the crucial technical pivots, and the cultural significance of 5 specific models, starting right at the beginning with the big one, the GE10.
The beast.
Yeah, the beast. And finishing up with the modern GE7, that specific bass version.
Yeah. And if you look at this whole series together, what you see is this perfect, decades-long case study. It shows the evolution of portability versus precision in analog tone shaping. It's really the story of how Baez figured out how to shrink a giant studio console function down to fit under your foot.
Without losing everything.
Exactly, without sacrificing all the power, anyway.
Okay, let's get into it then. Let's start with that original blueprint, the GE10. And you called it a beast. It really was a monster, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
When most people picture a Baez S pedal, they see that small, colorful little stomp box.
The classic compact.
Right. But the GE10 was, well, anything but small. It was part of Baez's very first lineup, these large format AC-powered units.
Yeah, you really have to put yourself back in 1976. Effects were still kind of transitioning from the recording studio onto the stage.
Right, it wasn't like today with massive pedal boards everywhere.
Not at all. So the GE10 arrived alongside these other large format pioneers that really established Baez's reputation for quality. Things like the CE1 chorus ensemble and the BF1 flanger. These things, they weren't built for neat little pedal boards. They were built tough, to withstand touring rigs, but deliver studio-level fidelity.
The size alone is pretty striking when you see pictures. You needed, dedicated space for this thing.
Yeah, a chunk of real estate.
And the original idea for the GE10 wasn't just guitar, was it? It was broader than that.
Absolutely not just guitar. It was designed as a universal tone tool. Guitar, bass, keyboards, basically anything that needed comprehensive frequency adjustment. The goal was really to take true studio-grade EQ, the kind of control engineers had on those massive mixing boards, and somehow package it into a format a touring musician could actually, manage.
Okay, so if the size was huge, we gotta assume the performance was pretty huge too. What were the specs that made the GE10 so powerful compared to the smaller pedals that came later?
Well, the key thing is the resolution and range.
Yeah.
The GE10 gave you 10 frequency bands.
10 bands.
10, which, just to put that in perspective, that's double the resolution of most compact EQs people use today. It gave you almost surgical control over the sound spectrum.
And those 10 bands covered what kind of frequency range?
It was enormous. It really stretched across the audible spectrum, and even beyond what most compact pedals cover. It went from 31 hertz.
Wow, that's low.
Yeah, that's serious sub-bass territory. This stuff you feel more than hear,
Right.
All the way up to 16 kilohertz, which covers all that high treble air harmonic sparkle.
Okay.
And each one of those 10 bands offered a huge amount of shaping power, approximately plus or minus 15 dBs of a boost or cut.
That's a lot of gain.
It is. Plus, you had an overall level slider for the global output control.
When you list those specs, 10 bands, 31 hertz to 16K plus minus 15 dB, it really sounds like they were aiming to replicate a piece of pro studio gear.
Oh, they absolutely were. And the core of it all was the architecture, fully analog. It relied on op-amp-based active bandpass filters.
Okay, op-amps. For listeners maybe not super deep into circuits.
Right, so an op-amp, operational amplifier, it's basically the component that processes the audio signal cleanly. It provides the gain needed to boost or cut specific frequencies without adding a ton of unwanted distortion.
Gotcha.
And that's why people still hunt down GE10s today, actually. They deliver that specific kind of warm analog precision that really defined electric instrument tone back then.
So, okay, we've got this powerhouse of control. Given that fidelity and range, what were musicians actually doing with this massive silver box back in the late 70s?
Well, it got used whenever that kind of precision was really needed. Guitarists, for example, they'd use the 10-band resolution to dial in a really specific mid-range hump for lead work.
Like boosting certain frequencies?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe boosting, say, 1.6 kilohertz and 3.2 kilohertz, while maybe slightly scooping 400 hertz, just for clarity, all without messing up the fundamental tone of their amp.
Right.
Bassists found it crucial for low-end shaping. They could precisely control boominess by scooping a specific frequency, like maybe 62 hertz, while boosting the necessary low mids for attack.
And you could use it as a boost, too.
Oh yeah, it served excellently as a clean preamp and single booster, just because of that massive 15 dB range available on a level slider.
Okay, this sounds technically amazing, but here's where the real world kicks in, right? What were the big trade-offs that came with that studio-grade performance?
The trade-offs were purely physical and, well, power-related. The large enclosure was just cumbersome. You couldn't just slap some Velcro on it and stick it on a lightweight board.
No way.
But the biggest hurdle was probably the power. It was AC only. It needed its own internal power supply.
Oh, right. No batteries.
No batteries. And it meant a significantly high current draw. Just a complete lack of modern pedal board convenience, really.
You couldn't just daisy chain it with everything else. I imagine touring with one of these was kind of a pain compared to modern stuff.
Exactly right. You needed a dedicated power socket nearby. And you certainly couldn't run it off a 9-volt. It was a powerhouse, but it demanded its own, infrastructure.
Yeah, you almost needed a dedicated roadie just to plug the thing in.
Pretty much.
So a powerhouse, definitely not a pocket rocket, but it really set the standard, didn't it?
Crucially, yes. The GE10 was a genuine milestone in portable EQ design. It was the foundational blueprint. One of the first true musician-focused EQ pedals that really took studio capabilities seriously. It established the core idea that an EQ pedal was an essential part of a touring musician's toolkit, and it really set the stage for every compact bi-SS EQ that came after it.
Okay, so we go from this bulky AC-powered GE10 in 76, and then just 2 years later, 1978, there's this really rapid and pretty dramatic pivot, the GE6.
Good.
This is where we see bi-SS take that concept and basically, well, shove it into their now iconic compact stomp box shape.
Yeah, that shift, moving into the standard size enclosure, it's maybe the most defining moment in the whole series history.
Right.
The GE6 was Boss's immediate answer to, portability.
Right.
And the fact that small standardized pedal boards were starting to become popular. It condensed the GE10's whole concept down into the compact line. And importantly, it made it operable via a 9V battery or the early ACA adapter. That was a massive win for convenience for touring.
Oh, huge.
Yeah, logistics-wise.
But, shrinking things down always means sacrifice, right? You simply cannot fit 10 bands of that kind of sophisticated analog circuitry into that tiny box and power it efficiently with a 9-volt battery. So what was the compromise they had to make?
The compromise was granularity. That's what we call the granularity trade-off.
Okay.
The GE6 immediately dropped from the GE10's 10 bandpass sections down to 6.
From 10 to 6.
Yep. And critically, the frequency range was substantially reduced. It focused pretty much entirely on the core mid-range of guitar and bass, but it was specifically tailored to avoid those power-hungry extremes, the super lows and super highs.
Right. So what were those specific 6 frequencies they chose, and why those ones?
The bands covered roughly 100 hertz up to 3.2 kilohertz. So if you look at that range, it basically bypasses the real sub-bass, like the 31 hertz and 62 hertz from the GE10.
Gotcha.
And also the ultra-higher frequencies, the 8 kilohertz and 16 kilohertz. For most gigging rock and pop guitarists in the late 70s, those were probably the least critical frequencies anyway. The bands they included focused on the fundamental warmth, the low-mid punch, and that upper-mid clarity, basically the frequencies that make sure you cut through a loud band mix.
So they kept the quality of the EQ. It was still analog, still op-amp filters,
Right.
but they sacrificed the range for sheer practicality. Why stick with analog circuitry there, though, especially if it led to power limitations?
Well, because back then, that was really the only way to get the tone characteristics musicians wanted.
True.
Digital modeling was decades away. Musicians relied on that analog feel, that warmth. The whole architecture of the GE6 was about delivering the most musically useful analog EQ shapes possible within the really tight limits of a compact box and a limited power budget.
Okay, so how did this affect its musicality? and its role in the market now that it was only 6 bands instead of 10?
Well, despite having less granularity, it was still incredibly effective. It kept a really musical contouring ability because the frequencies they chose hit those really crucial points for tone correction.
Right.
If your amp sounded a bit dark, you could boost the 3.2 kilohertz band. If your rhythm playing felt muddy, you could maybe scoop the 100 hertz band a little. It was simple, intuitive, and it worked.
It really served as that critical bridge, didn't it, between the kind of high-end studio world and the everyday musician?
Absolutely. You could say the GE6 kind of democratized tone shaping.
Yeah.
It took the whole concept of EQ out of the realm of expensive, complex studio gear and put it right onto the everyday pedal board. It popularized the idea that an EQ pedal wasn't just some niche tool, but actually an essential, maybe always-on device you could use to adapt your rig to different rooms, different venues.
Right, making your sound consistent.
Exactly. And it really paved the way for the industry standard that was just around the corner.
And that industry standard, the one that pretty much defines the whole category, has to be the GE7, launched in 1981. And it's still in production today.
Incredible, isn't it?
It really is. This is that iconic yellow box that almost every guitarist, has owned or at least used at some point.
Yeah, the GE7 basically took the foundational success of the GE6 and just refined it technically.
Right.
It hit that perfect balance of portability, resolution, and power efficiency. It kept the compact format, 9V power, obviously. But critically, it expanded on the GE6's structure by adding one more band.
Ah, the 7th band.
The 7th band, establishing that 7-band layout that just became the global standard for compact EQs.
Let's talk about those specific 7 frequency centers. They feel really foundational because they map so perfectly onto the most critical harmonic ranges for guitar, right?
They really do. The GE7 centers are 100 hertz, 200 hertz, 400 hertz, 800 hertz, 1.6 kilohertz, 3.2 kilohertz, and 6.4 kilohertz. And if you look at that progression, it addresses pretty much every major tonal element. Like the 100 hertz and 200 hertz bands, they control the fundamental warmth, the bottom end.
Right.
The 400 hertz and 800 hertz bands are absolutely crucial. That's where that characteristic honk or nasal quality of a lot of classic rock tones lives.
The mids that cut through.
Exactly. And then 1.6 kilohertz and 3.2 kilohertz control the presence, really allowing the guitar to slice through a mix, while 6.4 kilohertz handles the air, the sparkle, the top end.
That's where all the pick attack lives, right?
Precisely. All the pick attacks, string noise, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So by controlling just these 7 points, you're surgically addressing the full dynamic structure of the instrument.
And it's still purely analog.
Still purely analog, yep. Using that same consistent op-amp filter network, maintaining the same rugged construction, and importantly, keeping that powerful plus-minus 50 dB boost cut range.
Okay, you mentioned consistency. Let's touch on a key feature of the whole BOSS line that maybe gets overlooked sometimes, the bypass system. Why does BISS typically use a buffered bypass, and how does that specifically help an EQ pedal like the GE7?
That's a great point. So a buffered bypass system uses active circuitry, basically a tiny preamp circuit, to condition the signal even when the pedal's switched off.
Right, unlike true bypass.
Exactly. True bypass physically wires the input straight to the output when it's off. But the buffered signal maintains a strong, consistent impedance. Now, for an EQ pedal, this is really vital.
Why is that?
Because EQ relies on precise frequency division. A good buffer ensures the signal that actually reaches the EQ circuit is pristine. It prevents tone degradation, especially over long cable runs or through big pedal boards. It keeps the signal integrity high, which is essential if you want to do detailed frequency sculpting.
Makes sense. Now, the versatility of the GE7 is just legendary. It's not just for, tweaking your tone a bit. It really functions as this entire toolkit in a little yellow box.
It truly is incredibly flexible. Beyond just basic correction, guitarists use it all the time as a clean boost, or even as a dedicated tone sculpting preamp placed early in the chain.
Right.
You can hit the front end of a tube amp much harder, drive it into natural saturation, but at the same time, make sure the tone hitting it is exactly what you want.
Can you give us a specific, practical example, maybe how players use it for tone correction with high-gain sounds?
Oh yeah, the classic high-gain trick is the low cut.
Right, getting rid of the mud.
Exactly. High-gain distortion pedals often amplify unwanted low frequencies, which can lead to that mushy or kind of overwhelming sound, especially down in the 100 hertz and 200 hertz range. So players will use the GE7 to just drop those frequencies pretty aggressively, and that tightens up the response dramatically, cleans up the attack, and also gives the bass player more space to work down low.
Smart.
And conversely, it's used constantly for that classic mid-boost. You just dial up the 800 hertz and maybe the 1.6 kilohertz sliders, and instantly your solo lifts right above the mix.
Okay, now you mentioned earlier that the GE7, indispensable as it is, has this known technical quirk. Why has that slight hiss, especially when you push the boost settings really hard, kind of persisted throughout its decades-long run? Couldn't modern tech just solve that?
Yeah, that's the classic analog trade-off, isn't it? And it's a great point. Yes, modern digital EQs can absolutely solve the noise issue entirely.
Right.
But the GE7 circuitry, when you're pushing those analog amp filters to their absolute limits, like cranking multiple bands up to plus 15 dB, it naturally introduces a minor increase in the noise floor. It just does. But players tolerate this, I think, because it's kind of inseparable from the feel and the response of those analog components. For a lot of musicians, that specific analog response, even with the faint hiss that might come with it at extreme settings, is still preferable to the sometimes maybe sterile or less responsive feel of some early digital alternatives.
So it's almost like the sound of power pushing those analog limits.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. And the fact that it's been continuously made for over 4 decades now, outliving countless digital competitors, well, that speaks volumes about its enduring utility, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
You find it on every style of pedal board imaginable, from beginners just starting out to stadium rock pros. It's just there.
Okay, so the GE7 works wonders for guitarists. But we know bass frequencies, they demand a totally different approach, right? You can't really accurately shape a bass guitar with a standard guitar EQ that starts way up at 100 hertz.
Nope, not effectively.
So this brings us to section 4, the really essential move towards instrument specificity.
Yet this was a critical realization for Boss S and for the industry, really. The GE6 and GE7, they were inherently guitar-centric. They largely ignored those deepest, most fundamental tones of the bass guitar.
Right.
When you're dealing with the spectrum below, say, 80 hertz, you just need dedicated tuning. Trying to use a guitar EQ on a bass often resulted in just inadequate control over the low-end density and punch.
And the pioneer in actually addressing this gap was the GE7B, which came out in 1987.
That's right, the GE7B bass graphic equalizer.
Yeah.
That marked Bias's first real foray into dedicated instrument-specific EQ design. They kept the familiar 7-band structure, because that was now the standard, but they fundamentally retuned, optimized the frequency center specifically for the lower register of the bass.
Okay, let's compare this directly to the GE7 then. What were those crucial differences in the frequency tuning?
Well, the centers were lowered dramatically to really account for the instrument's true range. Where the standard GE7 started at 100 hertz, the GE7B's key centers were 50 hertz, 120 hertz, 400 hertz, 500 hertz, 800 hertz, 4.5 kilohertz, and 10 kilohertz.
Ah, okay, so starting at 50 hertz. That's significant.
Hugely significant. Dropping down to 50 hertz gave bassists proper control of the true foundation, low E string, which resonates around 41 hertz. This difference in the bottom end, I mean, it's everything for a bassist.
Yeah, that 50 hertz band is basically the difference between having actual control over the rumble and just kind of hoping your amp handles it okay.
Precisely. The GE7B allowed for surgical shaping of that low-end density, much more precise control over mid-presence, which is crucial for articulation on bass, and also dialing in the treble clarity for high-end snap or string noise. And it was also really indispensable for balancing different room acoustics, which, as any bassist knows, can drastically affect low frequencies on stage.
Right, fighting the boominess. Now, the GE7B had a relatively short production run, didn't it? Only 87 to 94 before it was replaced. Why the quick succession to a new model?
Yeah, it was foundational. It proved the concept worked and was needed. But the industry was changing pretty fast then. The GE7B got superseded, mainly because Bias saw the need for improved noise performance and critically better optimization for modern bass instruments that were emerging.
Ah, okay. Which brings us to the modern staple, the GEB7, the graphic equalizer bass, launched in 95 and, like the GE7, still in production today.
Yeah, the GEB7 is really the refined evolution. Bias basically addressed 2 main things: improving the circuit design for better noise performance, making it quieter, and, most importantly, optimizing the frequency spacing, specifically for the rise of 5-string and even 6-string basses.
Right, that's a crucial distinction. Why does adding a 5th string, that low B, fundamentally change what you need from an EQ pedal?
Well, think about it. The standard 4-string bass low E string is around 41 hertz, right?
Right.
A 5-string bass adds a low B string, which rings in just above 30 hertz, about 30.87 hertz technically.
Oh.
So if your EQ pedal starts at 100 hertz, or even 50 hertz, but maybe isn't powerful enough down there, you have virtually zero effective control over that fundamental frequency range of the B string.
Yeah, you're missing the bottom note entirely.
Exactly. The GEB7's design, with a powerful, refined 50 hertz band, ensures that bassists playing these modern extended-range instruments can actually properly sculpt their sublows without just letting them turn into unusable mud.
Okay, so the core frequencies for the GEB7 are 50 hertz, 120 hertz, 400 hertz, 500 hertz, 800 hertz. Wait, no. 50, 120, 400, 500, 4.5 kilohertz, and 10 kilohertz. We see a slightly tighter grouping in the upper mids compared to the GE7B.
Yeah, exactly. The centers are 50, 120, 400, 500. Then it jumps to 800 hertz, 4.5 kilohertz, and 10 kilohertz. Oh, wait, let me check that. Apologies. The GB7 frequencies are actually 50 hertz, 120 hertz, 400 hertz, 500 hertz, 800 hertz, 4.5 kilohertz, and 10 kilohertz. You're right. The GE7B had the 800 hertz band, too. The key change in the GB7 wasn't removing the 800 hertz, but refining the performance and tailoring the overall response. My mistake there.
Ah, okay, so it keeps the 800 hertz. What does that specific frequency spread allow players to do?
Well, that grouping, especially having both 400, 500, and 800 hertz, lets players really focus on the pop and definition of their tone, the attack. Advanced uses for the GEB7 often focus on dynamic shaping.
Like what?
Like, for instance, using that 4.5 kilohertz band to really emphasize pick attack, if you're using a pick, or maybe dialing it back a bit, or balancing the vastly different tonal needs for slap playing versus fingerstyle playing.
Right, slap needs that satirizing.
Totally. And it's versatile in where you put it, too. It can be a front-end shaper right after the bass, or it can live in the effects loop of an amp for post-preamp refinement.
And that helps with stage problems, too, presumably.
Hugely. It's invaluable for managing those common stage issues, particularly filtering out specific resonant low frequencies that cause that horrible stage boominess in smaller venues. Yeah. You could just surgically scoop out the problem frequency, maybe around 120 hertz or even 50 hertz, without killing your overall low-end power.
Okay. Finally, we noted that little technical consideration with the GE7, the hiss at extreme settings. Does the GEB7, being the sort of apex of their analog bass EQ design, have any similar quirks to be aware of?
Well, while the GB7 definitely features improved lower noise circuitry compared to its predecessors, it is still analog.
Right.
So a subtle consideration that maybe pro engineers or really picky users might notice is that if you push the boost or cut on several adjacent bands to the absolute extreme, say, you max out both the 400 hertz and 500 hertz sliders.
Mm-hmm.
The small frequency overlaps between those analog bandpass filters can introduce some subtle phase coloration. It's not distortion, just a slight change in the phase relationship between frequencies.
Okay.
Again, for 99% of musicians, this is totally negligible, maybe even inaudible in a mix, but it just highlights the inherent technical limits you hit when pushing analog hardware way beyond moderate use.
Understood. But nonetheless, its nearly 30-year legacy kind of proves its status, right? It's the benchmark, road-tested analog EQ for bass.
Absolutely. It really remains the gold standard for so many players, combining that crucial low-frequency control with the reliability and sheer durability the YSS Compact series is famous for.
Okay, so we've done this incredibly detailed journey now, starting way back with that AC-powered studio beast, the GE10, all the way through to the razor-sharp, instrument-specific GEB7. Let's try and synthesize the overarching story here. What were the, say, 3 major evolutionary steps that really define this whole product line?
Yeah, I think the story really boils down to 3 main points: format progression, technical refinement, and application specificity.
Okay.
The most obvious visible step is that format shift, right?
Right.
Moving from the massive AC-powered 10-band GE10, which was almost a niche, studio-ish product, to the much more accessible, compact 9V series that started with the GE6.
Right, that was BOSS prioritizing practicality for the actual gigging musician.
Totally. Making it fit on the board, making it easy to power.
So the shrinking of the physical unit kind of defined the direction. But that immediately led to the second theme, right? The technical refinement and the compromise that came with it initially.
Exactly. Miniaturization, at first, forced that drop in precision, going from 10 bands down to 6 in the GE6. But BOSS didn't just settle there.
No.
They immediately refined the design to increase the precision again, adding back that critical 7th band in the GE7. And at the same time, as we saw, especially with the GEB7, the engineers were constantly working on quieter operation, subtle circuit updates. basically optimizing the core technology without fundamentally changing its analog nature.
And the final big evolutionary trend you mentioned is that crucial shift from just general purpose use to real instrument specificity.
Yeah, the GE10 was pitched as a tool for everything: guitar, bass, keys, whatever. The GE7 then became the specialized, almost indispensable standard that was really optimized for the guitar's frequency range. But then, realizing the limitations there for bass players, BAWS created the GEB line, explicitly tuning those frequency centers, especially those vital low bands below 100 Hz, to serve the unique needs of modern bassists, including players using extended range instruments.
It's pretty remarkable that across, almost 5 decades in these 5 major models, there's one technical thread that just stays constant through it all. What's that enduring backbone of the line's reputation?
It really comes down to the constant reliance on 2 core analog technologies. First, that op-amp filter circuitry. The decision to stick with true analog components for the actual EQ processing, maintaining that specific warmth and responsiveness people liked.
Right.
And second, the consistent use of the buffer bypass system across the compact pedals. And this highlights a really foundational consistency. It's like BIOS found a core formula that worked reliable analog fidelity paired with good signal integrity, and then just spent decades optimizing how it was applied, rather than throwing it out and starting over with something completely different every few years.
So the legacy here really is that the GE and the GEB lines together basically defined what portable EQ should be. They made professional-level tone shaping accessible, affordable, and incredibly reliable for musicians everywhere.
Yeah, they took a concept that previously required maybe a large rack unit or finding space on a mixing desk, and they distilled it down into something tough, practical, road-ready. It gives you the precision you need for just a tiny little tone tweak or the sheer power you need for a dramatic solo boost, all in a format that literally fits in the palm of your hand. Hashtag Hack Outro.
Okay, so to quickly recap our deep dive into the Bar SS GE series, we started way back with the studio pioneer, that 10-band monster, the GE10. We saw the necessary compromise, but also the increased accessibility that came with the 6-band GE6. Then we hit the compact 7-band standard that's still with us today, the ubiquitous GE7.
The yellow brick.
The yellow brick. And finally, we explored that instrument-specific powerhouse tuned specifically for low frequencies, the GEB7.
Yeah, the GE series really provides a perfect lens to view product refinement in the music gear industry. It's like a decades-long masterclass in balancing high technical capability, like having 10 bands of control, with the absolute necessity of practicality and roadworthiness.
Right.
The ultimate goal always seeming to be ending up with a compact, super reliable 9V-powered box.
It's an incredible story, really, of technical evolution and adapting to the market. But here's maybe the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider the next time you're dialing in your tone. Despite the absolute prevalence today of hyper-detailed digital modeling, complex software interfaces, high-tech multi-effects units that do everything, what does the continuous decades-long production of simple, dedicated analog graphic equalizers like the BE7 and the GB7 really tell us?
Yeah, it suggests something interesting, doesn't it? It suggests that maybe there's an enduring utility, perhaps even a functional ceiling to complexity sometimes. When it comes down to the practical application of sculpting your tone, especially in a live environment, maybe sometimes the original analog solution, perfectly tuned to the specific harmonic structure of your instrument, maybe it remains not just a nostalgic choice, but actually the single most effective tool for the job.
Something to ponder next time you reach for that little yellow pedal.
Definitely something to think about.